I just want to put together a little video kind of going over the Cassidy processing chain. There's kind of a lot going on, more than I initially wanted, but a lot of little things are kind of being done in the chain. So it kind of just starts with these 4 VO files that feed into an unprocessed layer, where all I'm doing is just cutting some of the low end to free up space for the bassier layer that I added in on a separate track. And then those same tracks here feed to a robot layer that's just a little bit of format shifting, blended into taste, mostly because I wanted to preserve Cassidy's original VO lines, because for a game like Overwatch, you know, the voice lines are such a big part of a competitive advantage in a game. Like, you hear these VO lines and you immediately know what's going to happen, like whether it's an ult or someone dying or being CC'd or whatever the case may be. So I tried not to deviate too far from that. And then just doing a little EQ cleaning up the low end, dipping out some of the low mids, some distortion, and then where the bulk of the sound kind of comes from is frequency shifting that's following an audio follower. So this is slightly changing. As you can see, it's like not even quite a percent, but it adds a little bit of movement, and the ensemble kind of adds on to that as well. And then some convolution reverb just to make it sound like it's coming from a robot, dialed back the mix a little bit. OTT just for some of that kind of bright added compression that you get, especially in the top band. Black box, just saturating the hell out of it, dialing back the output a little bit. And then a gate. I noticed there was kind of these modulated tails that trailed off a little bit, and this was only happening for certain VO lines, but for the sake of putting together a chain that could scale with a ton of VO lines, I wanted to make sure that I had this gate to just to kind of remove any of that excess stuff. Then there's a phasing layer, which is just some convolution reverb, and a doubler where I'm removing the direct signal and only keeping the 2 side signals. These are set to align, and it's basically just putting out a stereo spread of this phase signal, so that you kind of have the mono image across these 2 tracks, the unprocessed and the robot layer, and then the phasing ones are kind of just sitting outside, just to add a little bit of depth. And then Pro Q2 is just cutting out a lot of the low end, some of the shrill top end. And then there's this bass layer that's very subtly mixed in. I'm not sure if you play Overwatch, but if you're familiar with Ramatra or the Omnic kind of species, if you even want to call them that, they tend to have a lot of sub-boosted low end in their voice, and this Cassidy skin wasn't necessarily an Omnic one, so I didn't go too deep with it, but I did want to add a little bit of low end. So starting with a low pass just for 263 hertz and below, some sub filter where I'm just cranking up the low end at roughly 80 hertz. Our bass comes in next just to kind of round that out right here. It's hiding somewhere. There it is. And then an 1176, which is compressing it really hard. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this compressor, but if you engage all of the buttons, it basically acts as a really hard limiter. You can see I've got the attack cranked up and the release kind of dialed back a bit. This is just to kind of even out the bass elements a little bit. So too long didn't read is basically just unprocessed layer cutting out the lows, a lot of modulation going on across these 2 layers, phasing kind of acting as a stereo image on the outside of the mono part of the signal, and then just a bassy layer at the bottom of it all. Layer bus here is just some distortion, some more modulation, add some movement. Snap peep, which is doing a whole lot. Probably could have got away with dialing this back a little bit, but oh well. Pultec, doing the classic boost and attenuate, and the low frequencies just to kind of shape the low end a little bit, make it feel a little thicker without being muddy. LA2, just doing some gentle compression. Brainworks Master Desk. This plugin's great, especially if you want to make a certain subset of frequencies mono. I have everything from 134 hertz and below set to mono, so that information's in the center, and then everything else kind of has a little bit of depth to it. Soothe, just kind of taming the harsh stuff. Pro Q3, more harsh frequencies just kind of being dialed back a bit. And then ozone imager. Once again, I felt like after this master des, I went back through Snap-Peep, did some comb filtering, and that kind of modified the image a bit. So once again, just dialing back everything from 185 hertz and below to mono, and then doing a little bit of sculpting across the mid-range and the treble. And that's the bulk of the sound. Everything else, I've just got a modulation bus with some chorus and kind of ear candy sort of stuff that's getting sidechain triggered from the actual VO assets themselves. So this is all really subtle. And then I've got the same thing going on with the convolution reverb here. So these two buses crash into this FX bus, which is EQ just to kind of have the frequencies in the mid-range present. And then an imager, once again, kind of pulling all the mono stuff. Everything from 234 hertz and below to the center, and then spatializing some of the mid-range and treble. And then the mix bus, doing a little bit more broadband sculpting with the Pultec. This Metric Halo plugin, which is great for just adding a little bit of saturation, making the sound a bit more interesting. Pro Q3, just some cleanup. C4, multiband compression, cleaning up some of the mid-range, making things sound a little bit more cohesive and consistent. Vitamin, I'm just adding some saturation to the low mids and the high mids, and a little bit scattered across the spectrum, but not doing a whole lot. What else? We got Soothe, once again, taming resonances, and then Ozone 9, just kind of acting as a peak limiter with a little bit of EQ, just 2 dB at that kind of boxy, boomy 300 hertz area. And that's it.